Poor little girl helps a millionaire fix his Mustang. When he sees the ring on her finger, hit the comments and tell us your city or country. Let's see how far this story reaches. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the country road as Emily Collins trudged home from school. At 9 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had already weathered more storms than most children her age. Her worn backpack hung heavily from her small shoulders, filled with books and, curiously, a small set of tools wrapped in an old cloth, a gift from her Uncle Matthew. Emily hummed softly to herself, kicking at loose pebbles along the roadside, when the gleaming black Mustang GT caught her attention. It hadn't been there that morning, its sleek form now looking oddly vulnerable with the hood propped open and a man in an expensive suit pacing beside it, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what meeting I'm missing," the man was saying, his voice sharp with frustration. "I'm stuck on County Road 16 with a car that won't start, and apparently no mechanic can make it out here for hours." Emily slowed her pace, studying the scene with interest. The man looked out of place against the backdrop of rural New York. His tailored suit probably cost more than Uncle Matthew made in a month at the garage. His dark hair was neatly styled, and even from a distance, Emily could see the glint of an expensive watch on his wrist as he gestured in frustration. "Fine, I'll figure it out myself," he said before ending the call and shoving the phone into his pocket. He turned toward the engine, staring at it as if willpower alone might fix whatever was wrong. Something about his helplessness stirred Emily's natural desire to assist. Uncle Matthew always said that knowledge wasn't worth much if you didn't share it when people needed help. "Excuse me, mister," Emily called out, approaching the car with measured steps. "Are you having car trouble?" Jack Reynolds turned, surprise evident on his face as he registered the small figure addressing him. At 35, he'd built an empire in New York's cutthroat real estate market. People cowered before his business acumen, competitors feared his name. But here he was, defeated by an automobile and being approached by a child. "Just a small issue," Jack replied with a tight smile. "Nothing to worry about. Shouldn't you be getting home?" Emily shrugged, moving closer to peek at the engine. "I know a thing or two about cars. My uncle's a mechanic, and he teaches me stuff." Jack couldn't help but laugh. "That's very sweet, but this is a high-performance vehicle. It needs a professional." "Maybe," Emily conceded, setting her backpack down. "But professionals are just people who know what to look for." Without waiting for permission, she leaned over the edge of the car, careful not to touch her clean school clothes against the dirty engine parts. Jack watched with amusement that quickly turned to astonishment as the little girl's eyes narrowed in concentration, scanning the engine with surprising expertise. "When did it start having problems?" she asked, all business now. "About 20 minutes ago, the engine began to overheat, and then it just died." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "Did you notice any sweet smell, like syrup?" Jack blinked. "Yes, actually." "How did you?" "It's your cooling system," Emily interrupted, pointing to a small puddle beneath the car that Jack hadn't even noticed. "See that leak? Your coolant's draining out. That's why it overheated." Jack stared at her, then at the puddle, then back at the girl. Her confidence was disarming, her knowledge inexplicable. "How old are you?" he asked. 9, Emily replied, already reaching for her backpack. "I might have something that can help temporarily. Uncle Matthew makes me carry an emergency kit." As she rummaged through her bag, Jack took a moment to really look at her. She was small for her age, with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond her years. Her clothes were clean but worn, suggesting limited means. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and there was a smudge of dirt on one cheek that she probably didn't even know was there. "Here," she said triumphantly, pulling out a small roll of what looked like specialized tape and a packet of cooling system sealer. "This can patch it until you get to a real mechanic. It won't hold forever, but it should get you to town." Jack was speechless as Emily proceeded to locate the leak in the radiator hose and apply the temporary fix with practiced hands. She worked quickly and methodically, explaining each step as if she were the adult and he the child in need of education. "There," she said finally, wiping her hands on a small towel from her kit. Give it about 10 minutes before you start the engine. You'll need to add some water to replace the coolant you lost. Jack found himself following her instructions, filling the radiator with bottled water from his car while Emily supervised with a serious expression that nearly made him smile despite his frustration at the situation. "I'm Jack, by the way," he said, extending his hand somewhat awkwardly. "Jack Reynolds." "Emily Collins," she replied, shaking his hand with surprising firmness. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Reynolds." As their hands met, something caught Jack's eye, a flash of deep red on Emily's finger. An old ring with a ruby stone, clearly too large for her small hand, but secured with what looked like thread wrapped around the band to keep it in place. For a moment, Jack felt the world tilt slightly. "That ring," he said, his voice suddenly soft. "That's an interesting ring." Emily glanced down, her expression softening. "It was my mom's." She said it was a symbol of an important promise. A shadow crossed her face. "She died last year." "I'm sorry," Jack said automatically, but his mind was racing. Why did that ring seem to pull at him like an undertow? Why did looking at it make his chest tighten with a strange mix of loss and recognition? The engine started smoothly when they tried it, breaking the moment. Emily beamed with satisfaction while Jack remained distracted, unable to shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, something beyond a simple roadside encounter. "Let me give you a ride home," he offered, surprising himself. "It's the least I can do." Emily hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. That would be nice." As they pulled away from the shoulder, neither could have possibly known how this chance meeting would unravel secrets buried for 15 years, shaking the foundations of both their lives and exposing truths that powerful people had gone to great lengths to keep hidden. As Jack drove Emily home, he couldn't stop glancing at the ruby ring on her small finger. Each time the afternoon sunlight caught its facets, flashes of memory teased the edges of his mind. "That ring," Jack finally said, breaking the silence. "It's quite unusual. Where exactly did your mother get it?" Emily twisted the ring absently, a habit formed over months of wearing the oversized heirloom. "Mom never said exactly, just that a special person gave it to her to keep safe, and that someday I might understand why it was important." Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles whitening. "May I see it more closely when we stop?" Emily nodded, curious about his interest but not alarmed. There was something in Mr. Reynolds's voice that sounded almost vulnerable, strange for a man who clearly had everything money could buy. When they pulled up to the modest apartment building where Emily lived, she slipped the ring off and handed it to Jack. The thread wrapped around the band to make it fit her small finger unraveled slightly. Time seemed to freeze as Jack held the ruby ring in his palm. The deep red stone was set in aged gold with distinctive filigree work along the band, tiny intertwined vines and leaves that he knew would form the initial O when examined closely. "Olivia Reynolds," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What?" Emily asked. Jack stared at the ring in disbelief. 15 years ago, I gave this exact ring to a little girl at Sunshine Children's Home. A girl named Lily." His eyes met Emily's, searching. "I promised I'd come back for her." Emily's eyes widened. "Sunshine?" "That's the name Mom sometimes mentioned. In her sleep, she'd have nightmares about it." Jack carefully returned the ring. "Your mother, Sarah Collins, did she work there? Perhaps she was a nurse?" Emily confirmed, "Before she adopted me. I was only 2, so I don't remember anything about it." Jack's mind raced with impossible connections. The timing, the ring, the coincidence of their meeting, it was too much. "Emily, I think," Jack paused, unsure how to proceed. This child's life was already complicated enough without his wild theories. "I think there might be more to your mother's story than you know, and maybe to mine as well." Before Emily could respond, the apartment door burst open, and a man in his early 40s rushed out, relief washing over his worried face. "Emily, where have you been? You're an hour late, and I was about to call." He stopped, eyes narrowing at the sight of Jack's expensive car and suit. "Uncle Matthew, this is Mr. Reynolds," Emily explained quickly. "His car broke down, and I helped fix it. He gave me a ride home." Matthew Collins sized up Jack with the cautious assessment of someone who'd learned the hard way not to trust appearances. "That was kind of you," he said finally, his tone guarded. "Emily's got quite the knack for engines." Jack nodded, extending his hand. "She's remarkable. Saved me today." As they shook hands, he added, "I'd actually like to speak with you both sometime about Emily's mother and where she worked before." Matthew's expression hardened slightly. "Why would that interest someone like you, Mr. Reynolds?" Jack reached into his jacket, producing a business card. "It's a long story, but I think it might be important for all of us." As Emily and Matthew watched Jack drive away, the ruby ring felt suddenly heavier on Emily's finger. She didn't understand why, but somehow she knew that her life had just changed forever. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he inserted his key card into the private elevator of his Manhattan skyscraper. The encounter with Emily had unearthed memories he'd spent years burying beneath acquisitions and profit margins. As the elevator ascended to the 52nd floor, Jack closed his eyes, allowing the past to wash over him. He was 7 again, standing in the sterile hallway of the Reynolds mansion, overhearing his adoptive father, Richard, telling his mother, Olivia, "The boy needs discipline, not coddling. He'll thank us when he's running the company someday." The elevator doors opened to his penthouse, all sleek lines and calculated luxury. Jack walked to the bar and poured himself a drink, not noticing Victoria until she cleared her throat. "There you are," his fiancée said, elegant in her designer dress. "The Andersons called twice about the merger proposal, and the wedding planner needs final approval on the floral arrangements." Jack barely heard her, his mind fixed on the ruby ring. "Victoria, do you remember me ever mentioning Sunshine Children's Home?" Her perfectly arched eyebrow raised slightly. "That charity case your mother was involved with years ago? Why on earth would that matter now?" Jack didn't answer, instead walking to his study where he kept a small wooden box hidden behind business awards. Inside was the only photograph he had of Lily, a faded Polaroid of a little girl with bright eyes holding his hand in the orphanage courtyard. He was a teenager then, sneaking visits against his father's wishes. "I promised I'd come back," he whispered to the photo. Across town, Emily sat at their small kitchen table while Uncle Matthew prepared a simple dinner. "Why was that rich man so interested in Mom's old workplace?" Matthew asked, trying to sound casual. Emily twisted the ruby ring. "He recognized the ring. Said he gave the same one to a girl named Lily at Sunshine." Matthew's hands stilled. "Your mother never talked much about that place, just said it closed suddenly, and that's when she adopted you." Emily reached for her backpack, pulling out a worn journal. "After Mom died, I found her diary. She mentioned papers in the bank and truths that need to be revealed." She looked up at her uncle. "Do you think this has something to do with Mr. Reynolds?" Matthew's expression darkened. "I don't know, but rich people like that don't usually take interest in people like us without a reason." He seemed sad, Emily said simply. Meanwhile, Jack was accessing the Reynolds Development Group server, searching for any mention of Sunshine Children's Home. What he found made his blood run cold: property acquisition records showing his father had purchased the orphanage land 15 years ago, just weeks after Jack's final visit to Lily. The official record stated the orphanage closed due to financial difficulties, but an internal memo revealed Richard Reynolds had leveraged political connections to force the closure, citing building code violations that appeared suspiciously timed. Most disturbing was a handwritten note from his father: "All loose ends tied, transfers complete. No documentation remains." Jack leaned back, memories colliding with this new reality. What had his father done? And why did Emily Collins have Lily's ring? As dawn broke over New York, two people in very different circumstances lay awake with the same questions, neither realizing how deeply their lives were already entwined or how dangerous their search for answers would become. Jack stepped out of the shower, the hot water having done little to clear his troubled mind. The spacious bathroom of his penthouse gleamed with marble and chrome, a testament to the wealth that had always felt more like a cage than a privilege. He wiped steam from the mirror, staring at the reflection of a man he barely recognized anymore. Victoria's voice floated in from the bedroom. "Jack, darling, the Huntingtons just confirmed for dinner tonight." Daddy wants to discuss moving up the merger announcement to coincide with our wedding. Jack closed his eyes, the word wedding hitting him like a physical blow. Their engagement had been announced in the Wall Street Journal, described as a union of real estate royalty. Never mind that neither of them had chosen it. The Reynolds and Huntington families had orchestrated everything, down to the 6-carat diamond that felt like a shackle on Victoria's finger. "I need to handle something first," Jack called back, his voice echoing in the cavernous bathroom. "Business matter." "Always business," Victoria sighed, a trace of genuine disappointment in her voice that Jack pretended not to hear. He dressed quickly in another impeccable suit and left without breakfast, instructing his driver to take him to the corporate archives. There was a truth buried in those records, and after meeting Emily, he couldn't ignore it any longer. Across town, in a cramped apartment in Queens, Emily awoke to the sounds of Uncle Matthew preparing for work. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Where Jack's penthouse occupied an entire floor with views stretching to the horizon, their 2-bedroom apartment barely contained their modest lives. The ceiling had water stains, the appliances were outdated, and the furniture had been loved past its prime. Yet, there was warmth here that Jack's luxurious home lacked. Photos of Emily with Sarah Collins lined the walls, Emily's first day of school, birthdays, Christmases, moments of ordinary joy captured and preserved. "Morning, kiddo," Matthew said as Emily entered their small kitchen. "Eggs are on the stove. I've got a double shift today, so Mrs. Patel next door will check on you after school." He paused, studying her face. "You thinking about that man from yesterday? The one with the fancy car?" Emily nodded, absent-mindedly touching the ruby ring. "He knew things, Uncle Matt, about my mom, about where I came from." Matthew's weathered face softened. "Your mom loved you more than anything, Em. Nothing changes that." "I know," Emily said. "But don't you think it's weird, him recognizing the ring, knowing about Sunshine?" Matthew sighed, checking his watch. "Look, after work, we'll look through your mom's things together. Maybe there's something we missed." He grabbed his worn leather jacket and car keys. "Just be careful around people like Reynolds. Rich folks live in a different world than us." After Matthew left, Emily pulled out Sarah's diary again, rereading entries that had seemed cryptic before but now held new significance. "I couldn't leave her there, not after what I overheard. Some promises are worth risking everything for. The papers are secure now. When she's old enough to understand, she'll need them to find her way back." Emily turned to the back of the diary, where Sarah had taped a small key. She'd always assumed it was decorative, but now wondered if it might unlock more than memories. Meanwhile, Jack sat in the climate-controlled archive room of Reynolds Development Group, surrounded by boxes of old files. Most executives would have delegated this task, but he trusted no one with what he was searching for. Hours passed before he found it, a folder labeled Sunshine Acquisition. Inside were property documents, zoning applications, and a single photograph that made his heart stop. The orphanage before demolition, a building that had featured in his dreams for 15 years. Beneath these was a sealed envelope marked RR Personal. Breaking his father's seal felt like crossing a line he couldn't uncross, but Jack did it anyway, tipping the contents onto the table: birth certificates, adoption papers, a list of children's names with notes beside them: potential, unsuitable, transferred, special case, and there, circled in red pen, Lily Sullivan, special handling per RR directive. The phone in his pocket vibrated. Victoria again, reminding him about dinner. Jack ignored it, his hands shaking as he continued reading. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so disturbing he could barely comprehend it. His father, the great Richard Reynolds, had orchestrated more than just real estate deals. He had moved children like chess pieces, including a little girl named Lily, who disappeared from all records the same day Jack had given her the ruby ring. As the realization dawned, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in years: raw, unfiltered rage. Whatever game his father had been playing, Emily Collins was somehow caught in the middle of it. And so was he. In two vastly different parts of the city, Jack and Emily simultaneously came to the same decision: they needed answers, no matter the cost. The worlds that had separated them for so long were about to collide. The heavy wooden door of First National Bank swung open as Emily and Matthew entered the following afternoon. Matthew had left work early, unable to focus after their conversation that morning. "You sure this is what your mom meant?" Matthew whispered, glancing around the marble-floored lobby with obvious discomfort. Banks had never treated him kindly. Emily nodded, clutching Sarah's diary. "The entry says, Truth locked away at First National, and we have this key. It has to be for a safe deposit box." At the customer service desk, a skeptical manager examined their documentation, Sarah's death certificate, Matthew's guardianship papers, and the key itself. "This is highly irregular," the woman said, peering at them over reading glasses. "But the paperwork appears in order. Follow me, please." They were led to a private room with a wall of metal boxes. When the manager inserted their key alongside her master key, box 1524 slid open with a satisfying click. "I'll give you privacy," she said, leaving them alone with the contents. Matthew lifted the lid to reveal a manila envelope, a small wooden box, and a sealed letter addressed to Emily in Sarah's handwriting, to be opened when you find your way back. Emily's hands trembled as she broke the seal. As she read, tears welled in her eyes. "Mom knew," she whispered. "All this time, she knew I wasn't who I thought I was." The letter revealed that Sarah had been head nurse at Sunshine Children's Home. One night, she overheard Richard Reynolds and the director discussing special arrangements for a child named Lily. Fearing for the child's safety, Sarah had taken the girl and fled, changing both their names and starting a new life far from New York. Inside the manila envelope were adoption papers, clearly forged, and original documents Sarah had smuggled out, including a birth certificate for Lily Reynolds, born to Olivia and Richard Reynolds. "That's impossible," Matthew breathed. "Richard Reynolds is one of the richest men in New York. And you're saying he's your father? Why would he give up his own child?" Emily stared at the birth certificate, her world tilting on its axis. "And Jack, if these are his parents too, then he's my brother," Matthew finished, his face pale. "Your brother, who somehow tracked you down after all these years." The wooden box contained one final item, a newspaper clipping about Olivia Reynolds' charity work with orphans, with a handwritten note in the margin, "She never stopped looking for you." While Emily and Matthew made their discovery, Jack sat in his private office at Reynolds Tower, staring at his computer screen in disbelief. His investigators had sent their first findings, employee records from Sunshine showing Sarah Collins had resigned the same day the orphanage closed. Her resignation letter cited ethical concerns, but a note in her file labeled her uncooperative and potential liability. More disturbing was what his investigators hadn't found, any record of what happened to a child named Lily after the orphanage closed. It was as if she had simply vanished, her existence erased from every system. Jack opened his desk drawer and removed a small wooden box nearly identical to the one Emily had just discovered. Inside was a faded photograph of his mother, Olivia, holding a newborn. He had found it hidden in her dresser years ago but never understood its significance. On the back, in his mother's elegant handwriting, Lily Elizabeth Reynolds, born 4:17 a.m., my perfect angel. The intercom buzzed, startling him. "Mr. Reynolds, your father is here to see you." Jack quickly returned the photo to its hiding place. "Send him in." Richard Reynolds strode into the office with the confidence of a man who owned the building, which technically he did. At 65, he remained imposing, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting power and authority. "Jack," he said, settling into a chair without waiting for an invitation. "Victoria tells me you've been distracted. Something about old property acquisitions." Jack's pulse quickened. How had Victoria known? He kept his face carefully neutral. "Just reviewing our history. The Sunshine Plaza project has me thinking about what stood there before." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Ancient history isn't worth your time. The future of Reynolds development is what matters now. Your future with Victoria, securing our legacy." The word legacy hung in the air between them, weighted with new meaning for Jack. He thought of Emily, or Lily, and the ring that had survived 15 years of secrets. "Of course, father," Jack replied smoothly. "Some loose ends just needed tying up." Richard stood, straightening his jacket. "Some things are better left buried, son. Focus on what matters." He moved to the door, then paused. Oh, and Jack, stay away from Queens. Nothing good ever came from that borough. As the door closed behind Richard, Jack sat frozen. His father knew about Emily, about his visit, about everything. The game was more dangerous than he'd imagined, and Richard Reynolds had always played to win. But for the first time in his life, so would Jack. Jack didn't go home that night. Instead, he drove to a nondescript hotel in Midtown, paid cash for a room, and made 3 calls, one to a private investigator he trusted, one to his personal attorney, and one to Emily's apartment. When Matthew answered, Jack spoke quickly. I need to meet with you and Emily. Not at your place, somewhere public but private. It's about what you found today. How did you know we found anything? Matthew asked, suspicion evident in his voice. Because I found something too, Jack replied. And I think we're all in danger. An hour later, they met at a quiet diner in Brooklyn. Emily clutched a small backpack containing Sarah's documents, her eyes wide with questions as Jack slid into the booth across from them. I think you're my brother, Emily said immediately, foregoing any greeting. Jack nodded slowly. And I think Richard Reynolds, our father, has been hiding you for 15 years. The question is why? Matthew placed a protective arm around Emily's shoulders. Sarah's letter mentioned something about special arrangements for Lily, for Emily. Any idea what that means? Jack's expression darkened. My father doesn't do anything without a purpose. Children from Sunshine weren't just adopted, they were selected. I found a list in the company archives categorizing children like inventory. For what? Matthew asked. I don't know yet. But the timing of the orphanage closure coincides with something else, the restructuring of Reynolds Development into a publicly traded company. My father needed significant capital for expansion. Emily leaned forward. What does that have to do with me? In the high-stakes world of business and inheritance, bloodlines matter, Jack explained, especially for someone as obsessed with legacy as Richard Reynolds. Understanding dawned on Matthew's face. Insurance? He was keeping her as insurance. Jack nodded grimly. Or leverage. He hesitated, the full horror of his suspicions still too terrible to voice. Emily pulled out Sarah's letter. Mom wrote that she overheard Richard say I needed to be prepared for my purpose, that something was scheduled to happen on my 18th birthday. Jack checked his watch. That's less than 9 years from now. We need to know what he was planning. So what do we do? Matthew asked. We need proof, concrete evidence that will hold up against the army of lawyers my father employs. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with my mother, Olivia. She must know something. Emily's eyes widened. My birth mother. Can I come? Jack shook his head. Too dangerous. Richard has people watching her constantly. But I'll tell her about you. He hesitated, then added softly, she never stopped looking, Emily. I found a whole box of private investigator reports in her closet once. Emily blinked back tears. All this time, I thought a waitress approached, interrupting the moment. As she set down coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for Emily, Jack noticed a black sedan slow down outside the diner's window. We need to go, he said sharply. Now, out the back. As they hurried through the kitchen and into the alley behind, Matthew grabbed Jack's arm. Reynolds, what have you gotten us into? Jack's eyes were hard as he watched Emily climb into Matthew's old truck. The truth. And my father will do anything to keep it buried. The morning light streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Patrick's Cathedral as Jack waited in a quiet corner, away from tourists and worshippers. This was the only place his mother could meet him without Richard's knowledge, her weekly confession providing the perfect cover. Olivia Reynolds entered, wearing large sunglasses and a modest hat, looking nothing like the socialite whose photo graced charity galas. At 58, she remained elegant, but Jack noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she sat beside him. Jack, she whispered, your message said it was urgent. I found her, Mother, Jack said simply. I found Lily. Olivia froze, her composure cracking. That's impossible. Richard said she died. Another of father's lies, Jack finished. She's alive. Sarah Collins took her and protected her all these years. Tears slipped beneath Olivia's sunglasses. My baby. Where is she? Is she all right? She goes by Emily now. She's 9, brilliant, and she has your eyes, Jack said gently. And she still has the ruby ring I gave her. Your ring? Olivia removed her gloves, revealing an identical ruby ring. My grandmother's rings, one for each twin. Twin? Jack's world tilted again. Olivia nodded slowly. You never knew. Richard made sure of that. Identical girls, born 7 minutes apart. He told me the second baby died during delivery. I was heavily medicated. By the time I was coherent enough to question anything, there were death certificates, a small private funeral. Why would he separate twins? Why take Lily away from you but keep her hidden at Sunshine? Olivia's voice dropped even lower. Insurance. Control. Richard's grandfather had a bizarre obsession with twins, believed they shared a special connection. When Richard discovered I was carrying identical girls, he began making arrangements. What kind of arrangements? Jack pressed. A backup plan. Richard built the company using methods that could someday be questioned. He needed a way to protect his legacy if you ever became problematic. She squeezed Jack's hand. Lily was his contingency. A genetic match to you, raised separately but under his control, ready to replace you if necessary. Jack felt physically ill. And the other twin, Elizabeth? I don't know what happened to her. Richard said she died, but after what you've told me about Lily, a church custodian walked by, making Olivia tense. I can't stay longer. Richard monitors my movements, but Jack, her grip tightened, be careful. There's more to this than even I know. Richard keeps a private vault in his office. Whatever you're looking for, it's there. As she rose to leave, Jack asked, will you meet her, Emily? Olivia's composure finally broke, a sob escaping. More than anything, but not until she's safe. Not until we're all safe from Richard. Later that afternoon, Richard Reynolds summoned his son to the executive floor of Reynolds Tower. As Jack entered the opulent office, Richard was watching a surveillance video on his computer. Interesting choice of meeting place this morning, Richard said, turning the screen to show Jack and Olivia at the cathedral. Care to explain why you're upsetting your mother with fairy tales about dead children? Jack realized with perfect clarity that the game had changed. His father wasn't just hiding secrets, he was dangerous. And somewhere across the city, Emily might be in grave danger too. We need to move, Jack said into his phone, pacing the executive bathroom where he'd retreated after the confrontation with his father. Richard knows I found Emily. He's watching both of us. What exactly did he say? Matthew's voice crackled through the line. Enough to make it clear he has eyes everywhere, Jack replied, checking beneath the bathroom stalls to ensure he was alone. I also learned something from my mother. Emily Lily had a twin sister named Elizabeth. Richard told Olivia the baby died at birth, but after everything else he's lied about. There was a long pause before Matthew spoke. You're telling me there might be another girl out there, another child he hid away? I don't know, but I need to access my father's private vault. Tonight. Can Emily stay somewhere safe? My cousin in Jersey. I'll take her there now. Matthew hesitated. Reynolds, my service buddy, Daniel, Sarah's brother, died investigating Sunshine 10 years ago. Car accident, they called it. I always thought it was fishy, but Sarah begged me to let it go for Emily's sake. Jack's blood ran cold. Daniel Collins. I saw his name in a security report my father keeps on his enemies. Richard has been tracking your family for years. This is bigger than just Emily, isn't it? Matthew asked, his voice grim. I think my father has been manipulating lives for decades, Jack confirmed. And I think Emily is just the tip of the iceberg. That evening, Richard Reynolds attended a charity gala, giving Jack his opportunity. Using his executive access card, he entered his father's private office suite. After hours, the vault was concealed behind a painting, a family portrait where Richard stood proudly with Jack and Olivia, his hand possessively on Jack's shoulder. The combination took 3 attempts. Richard's birth date failed, as did the company founding date. On a hunch, Jack tried the day he was formally adopted by the Reynolds family. The lock clicked open. Inside were stacks of documents organized in meticulous files. Jack photographed everything with his phone, working quickly through folders labeled Special Adoptions, Genetic Research, and Contingency Assets. What he found made his stomach turn. Richard had orchestrated dozens of adoptions from various orphanages, selecting children with specific traits and potential. Most disturbing was a file titled Twin Studies, containing research on identical twins raised separately, testing the limits of genetic influence versus environment. A folder marked Reynolds' Succession held the most damning evidence, detailed plans for Emily's future, including preparations to insert her into the company should Jack ever become a liability. There were schedules for her education, psychological conditioning, even medical procedures planned for her teenage years. Beneath it all, a final folder labeled Elizabeth contained only a death certificate and a single photograph of an infant. On the back, written in Richard's precise handwriting, cryopreserved tissue sample stored at Reynolds Medical Research. Access code 7729ER. Jack's phone buzzed with a text from Matthew, man in black sedan watching the apartment. We left through the back. Safe now. Where are you? As Jack began to reply, the office light suddenly flipped on. He looked up to find Victoria standing in the doorway, her evening gown suggesting she'd come directly from the gala. I knew you were hiding something, she said coolly. What exactly are you doing, Jack? He slipped his phone into his pocket. You wouldn't understand. She approached slowly, taking in the open vault and scattered files. Try me, because right now I'm your only option. Your father sent his security team to find you 10 minutes ago. Jack studied her face, searching for deception. Victoria had been part of his life for years, their engagement a business arrangement neither had chosen, but he'd never truly known where her loyalties lay. Why would you help me? He asked. Victoria's perfect composure cracked slightly. Because I've seen what Richard does to people who stand in his way, and because I'm tired of being another asset in the Reynolds portfolio. She glanced at her diamond engagement ring. We've both been pawns, Jack. I just figured it out sooner. From the hallway came the sound of voices and footsteps. Jack had seconds to decide. My father has been manipulating children's lives, including my sister's sisters, actually, twins. He's been experimenting with genetic research, separating families. It goes beyond anything you can imagine. Victoria nodded once, decisively. Take the service elevator to the basement. I'll tell them I saw you heading to the roof. She slipped off her heels. Go now. As Jack raced down the service corridor, files tucked under his arm and phone clutched in his hand, he realized the battle lines were being drawn. Richard Reynolds had spent decades building his empire on secrets and manipulation. But now, an unlikely alliance was forming to bring that empire down, a homeless mechanic, an orphan child, a reluctant socialite, and the son who'd finally discovered the truth. The question was whether they could survive long enough to expose it. Jack met Matthew and Emily at an all-night diner in New Jersey, his face haggard from his narrow escape. The vinyl booth creaked as he slid in, placing a flash drive on the table. Everything I found in my father's vault, he explained, his voice low, including this. He slid a photograph across the table, the picture of baby Elizabeth. Emily stared at it, her small fingers tracing the infant's face. My twin, she whispered. Mom never told me. She might not have known, Matthew said gently. Sarah took you and ran. She wouldn't have had time to investigate everything. Jack nodded. From what I found, Richard separated you immediately after birth, told Olivia that Elizabeth died while secretly placing you, Lily, at Sunshine, where he could monitor your development. But why? Emily asked, the question that had haunted them all. Jack hesitated, glancing at Matthew. How much should a 9-year-old know about the darkness that had shaped her life? Matthew understood the look. Why don't you go pick a song on the jukebox? Once Emily was out of earshot, Jack spoke rapidly. Richard has been conducting some kind of twisted experiment. The files mention identical genetic material raised in controlled versus variable environments. There are psychological assessments, intelligence tests, even medical procedures scheduled for her teenage years. What kind of sick? Matthew stopped himself. And Elizabeth, the other twin? Jack's voice dropped further. The death certificate looks legitimate, but there's a reference to preserved tissue samples. I think Richard may have harvested genetic material from the deceased twin for some kind of research. There are connections to a medical facility owned by Reynolds' subsidiaries. We need to go to the police, Matthew insisted. With what? Documents I stole? Against one of the most powerful men in New York? Jack shook his head. We need irrefutable evidence and witnesses willing to testify. The former head of Sunshine Children's Home might know something, Dr. Margaret Winters. Matthew nodded. Sarah mentioned her. Last I heard, she moved to Boston after the orphanage closed. Emily returned, sliding back into the booth. Did you know the ruby ring has a secret? She asked, twisting the band until it clicked, revealing a tiny compartment in the setting. Inside was a microfilm no larger than a fingernail. Both men stared in amazement as Jack carefully extracted it. I need to find a way to read this, he said. It could be the key to everything. Hours later, in a 24-hour copy shop, they huddled around a microfiche reader as the tiny film revealed its secrets, a ledger of payments, dates, and code names, all connected to something called Project Gemini. Most shocking was the signature at the bottom of each authorization, Richard Reynolds. It's a record of bribes, Jack realized. Payments to officials who looked the other way when Richard acquired land by closing orphanages. Payments to doctors who falsified death certificates. Even payments to suppress investigations. Matthew pointed to one entry, D. Collins, neutralized, $50,000. My God, he breathed. He paid to have Sarah's brother killed. Emily, who had been quiet throughout, suddenly spoke. There's a name here that keeps repeating. Who is Victoria Huntington? Jack's blood ran cold. My fiancée. And according to this, she's been reporting on my activities to my father for years. As dawn broke over the horizon, 3 people bound by secrets and lies formed a new plan, one that would either free them all or destroy everything in the process. The Sunshine Plaza groundbreaking ceremony was plastered across every business section in New York. Full-page ads proclaimed, Reynolds Development Group revitalizes historic property. Charity gala and groundbreaking, Saturday, 7 p.m. Jack stared at the announcement over breakfast in their new hideout, a small cabin on Matthew's cousin's property in the Catskills. For 3 days, they had strategized, gathered evidence, and made careful contact with potential allies. It's perfect, Jack said, circling the date. Every major news outlet will be there. Father has invited city officials, business leaders, even the governor. Emily looked up from her notebook, where she'd been organizing their findings. You want to expose him publicly at his own event? Matthew frowned. It's risky. The security will be tight. That's why we need help, Jack replied, spreading out a hand-drawn floor plan of the venue. I've been in touch with Dr. Winters. She's willing to testify about what happened at Sunshine, the children selected for special placement, the records that disappeared. Can we trust her? Matthew asked. She ran that place. She was another pawn, Jack said. Richard threatened her medical license if she didn't cooperate. She's been living with the guilt for 15 years. Emily pointed to the microfilm evidence. What about Victoria? She's been spying on you this whole time. Jack's expression tightened. Actually, I'm not so sure anymore. He pulled out his phone, showing them a text message, found something in Richard's private email. Meeting you was no accident. He engineered your car breakdown near Emily's school route. He's been watching her for years. Be careful. V. You think she's switching sides? Matthew asked skeptically. I think she's as much a victim of my father's manipulation as anyone, Jack replied. And she has access we need. The plan they formulated was audacious. Victoria would ensure Jack was added to the ceremony's speaker list, a surprise announcement of his engagement and future role as CEO. Matthew, posing as event staff, would secure their technical needs. Dr. Winters would arrive with documentation of Richard's orphanage schemes, and Emily, their secret weapon, would remain hidden until the perfect moment. What about my other sister? Emily asked quietly. Elizabeth? Jack hesitated. I've located the facility where the genetic samples are stored. After the ceremony, once Richard is exposed, we'll have the legal authority to investigate fully. As dusk approached on the day before the ceremony, they made their final preparations. Burner phones were distributed, backup plans established, evidence secured in multiple locations. If anything happens to me, Jack told Matthew, make sure Emily gets to Olivia. She's staying at the Plaza Hotel under her maiden name, Wilson. Matthew nodded grimly. And if anything happens to Emily or me, you burn the whole Reynolds empire to the ground. Emily, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll be together after it's all over, right? The two men exchanged glances, the weight of what they were attempting settling heavily between them. They were about to challenge one of the most powerful men in New York. A man who had orchestrated murders, manipulated lives, and buried secrets for decades. Yes, Jack promised, kneeling to meet her eyes. When this is over, no more secrets, no more hiding. We'll be a real family. As they huddled together over their final plans, none of them noticed the black sedan slowly cruising past the cabin's long driveway or the camera lens capturing their silhouettes in the window. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with New York's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over tables adorned with centerpieces of white roses and gold accents. A massive banner stretched across the stage, Sunshine Plaza, brightening New York's future. Jack adjusted his bow tie in the restroom mirror, Victoria beside him touching up her makeup. Security's checking everyone at the door, she whispered. Richard added extra guards after that text I sent you. Is Matthew in position? Jack asked. Victoria nodded. Service entrance, as planned. Dr. Winters arrived 10 minutes ago. She's at table 7. And Emily, with your mother in the hotel suite, waiting for the signal. Victoria hesitated. Jack, Richard seems different tonight, more agitated than I've ever seen him. Jack's phone vibrated with a text from Matthew, something's wrong. Security asking for secondary ID checks. Plan B. Before Jack could respond, the restroom door swung open. 2 security guards stood there, earpieces in place. Mr. Reynolds, your father requests your presence backstage immediately. Jack exchanged a glance with Victoria. This wasn't part of the plan. Backstage, Richard Reynolds stood reviewing note cards, immaculate in his tuxedo. When he saw Jack, he dismissed his assistants with a wave. Son, he said, his voice unnervingly calm, I thought we might have a father-son chat before the festivities. He handed Jack a glass of scotch. To new beginnings. Jack didn't drink. What's this about, father? Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. You know, when I adopted you, people said I was foolish. Why not have my own biological child? Why raise another man's son? He circled Jack slowly. But I saw potential in you. With the right molding, the right pressure, you could become exactly what I needed. A successor, Jack said flatly. An extension, Richard corrected, of my vision, my legacy. He set down his own untouched drink. So imagine my disappointment when my son starts sneaking around, meeting with orphans and disgraced nurses, digging up ancient history. I know everything, Jack said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. About Lily, about Elizabeth, about what you did. Richard shrugged. What I did to po de archivo, txt, nombre, revised text for text to speech.txt, contenido, was protect my interests. Business requires contingency plans. They were children, your own daughters. They were assets, Richard countered coldly. As are you. As is that charming little mechanic you've been hiding with. Jack felt ice in his veins. If you've touched Emily? Richard laughed. Oh, you mean Lily? No, she's quite safe for now. He checked his watch. The ceremony begins in 5 minutes. You have a choice, Jack. Stand beside me as planned, announce your engagement to Victoria, accept your role as heir to Reynolds' development, or watch everything you've built crumble. You're the one who's going to fall, Jack replied, moving toward the door. Richard's next words stopped him cold. Did your mother ever tell you why I chose you specifically to adopt out of all the orphans available? Jack turned slowly. What are you talking about? Richard's smile was chilling. Go ahead with your little exposure plan tonight, and you'll find out exactly how deep the Reynolds family secrets go, even the ones you don't know you're keeping. The MC's voice echoed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the visionary behind Sunshine Plaza, Mr. Richard Reynolds. Applause filled the ballroom as Richard took the stage, his commanding presence drawing all eyes. Jack slipped back into the crowd, frantically scanning for Victoria. He found her near the service entrance, her face tense. Richard knows, Jack whispered. He threatened Emily. Victoria pressed a small USB drive into his palm. Then we have nothing to lose. I downloaded his private emails, communications with doctors about genetic testing, surveillance reports on Emily. It's all here. The sound of Richard's voice filled the room, proud to announce Sunshine Plaza, a revolutionary development that will revitalize this historic neighborhood. Jack spotted Dr. Winters at her table, her eyes meeting his with a slight nod. Matthew had positioned himself near the audiovisual controls, wearing a catering uniform. Everything was in place despite Richard's warnings. And now, Richard continued, I'd like to invite my son, Jack Reynolds, to join me in announcing an exciting new chapter for our family and company. The spotlight found Jack. As he walked toward the stage, time seemed to slow. Years of manipulation, lies, and hidden truths had led to this moment. Whatever secret Richard held over him couldn't be worse than the truth they'd already uncovered. Thank you, Father, Jack said, taking the microphone. His voice remained steady despite his racing heart. Before we discuss Sunshine Plaza, I'd like to share something about the property's history. Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. 15 years ago, Jack continued, an orphanage called Sunshine Children's Home stood on this site. It was closed suddenly, the children dispersed, and all records of its existence nearly erased. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One of the video screens behind them flickered as Matthew uploaded the evidence they'd gathered. I recently discovered why, Jack said. The orphanage was part of a decades-long operation to manipulate children's lives for personal gain, corporate advantage, and disturbing experiments. Richard stepped forward, his hand reaching for the microphone. My son is clearly unwell. I have proof, Jack interrupted, gesturing to the screens now displaying documents from Richard's vault. These files show how Richard Reynolds separated twin daughters at birth, declaring one dead while secretly monitoring the other. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Reporters began frantically taking notes. At the back of the room, a commotion erupted as Olivia Reynolds entered, Emily at her side, both wearing identical ruby rings. I'd like to introduce Emily Collins, Jack announced, born Lily Reynolds, daughter of Olivia and Richard Reynolds, and my sister. Richard lunged for the microphone. Security, cut the video. It's too late, Richard, came a voice from the crowd. Sarah Collins stood there, pale but determined, supported by Matthew. I didn't die in that car accident. Your men failed. The room erupted in chaos. Cameras flashed as Emily ran toward Jack while security guards looked to Richard, unsure whose orders to follow. I saved Lily when I heard your plans for her, Sarah continued, addressing Richard directly, to raise her separately as a replacement for Jack if he ever disappointed you, to use her for your twisted genetic research. Olivia stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. It's true. Richard told me our second daughter died at birth. He's been lying for 15 years. Richard's face contorted with fury. You know nothing. Everything I did was for this family, for our legacy. He turned to Jack. You think you've won? You've destroyed everything, including yourself. Did you ever wonder why I chose you to adopt? Look at yourself, Jack. Look at your mother. The resemblance isn't coincidental. As the truth dawned on Jack's face, Richard's laugh was hollow. That's right. Olivia wasn't just my wife, she was your biological aunt. Your real mother was her sister, making you a Reynolds by blood all along, just another piece in my grand design. The ballroom fell silent after Richard's revelation. Reporters stood frozen, cameras still flashing, but capturing a moment of collective shock. Jack staggered slightly, his hand finding Emily's shoulder for support as the implications crashed over him. You're saying I'm, Jack began. A Reynolds by blood, Richard finished, a twisted smile on his face. Olivia's niece, her sister Margaret, died in childbirth. You were the perfect candidate for my plans, blood of our blood, but raised under my complete control. Olivia moved toward Jack, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know for years, Jack. When I discovered the truth about your mother, my sister, Richard threatened to send you away if I ever told you. Dr. Winters stepped forward from the crowd. I can confirm this. Reynolds Development didn't just acquire orphanages, they engineered situations to create orphans when necessary. Margaret Wilson's death was no accident. A reporter shouted, Are you accusing Richard Reynolds of murder? Before Richard could respond, the ballroom doors burst open. FBI agents flooded the room, led by a stern-faced woman who approached the stage. Richard Reynolds, she announced, you're under arrest for fraud, falsification of records, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy. Richard's face drained of color as two agents moved to flank him. You have nothing, he sputtered. No evidence that will hold up in court. Victoria stepped forward, her designer dress incongruous with her resolute expression. They have everything, Richard. While you were focused on Jack, I've been cooperating with the FBI for months. Reynolds Development's offshore accounts, the bribes to city officials, the falsified death certificates, including Elizabeth Reynolds. Emily gasped. My twin sister? Victoria's expression softened as she looked at the child. Elizabeth didn't die at birth. She was adopted by the Huntington family, my family. I didn't know until last year when my father revealed the truth on his deathbed. The revelation rippled through the stunned crowd. Photographers captured Richard's face as realization dawned. He began. Elizabeth Reynolds, Victoria confirmed. Your daughter, the one you thought you could control through my engagement to Jack. Another pawn in your twisted game. As agents led Richard away, reporters surged forward, shouting questions. The ballroom descended into chaos, camera crews pushing to capture every moment of the Reynolds empire's spectacular collapse. Outside, news vans lined the street. By morning, headlines would blare across the country, Reynolds' real estate empire built on fraud and family secrets. Markets would open to Reynolds Development Group stock in freefall. Partners would distance themselves, contracts would be cancelled, and decades of business relationships would dissolve overnight. Days passed in a blur of police interviews, legal depositions, and media frenzy. Jack, Olivia, Emily, and Victoria retreated to a secluded property upstate, protected from the press by security guards Matthew had personally vetted. 1 week after the gala, they gathered in the living room as news broke of further investigations. Reynolds Development's board had voted unanimously to remove Richard's name from the company. Projects were halted, including Sunshine Plaza. The FBI had expanded their investigation to include Reynolds' medical research, where disturbing evidence of genetic experimentation had been uncovered. What happens now? Emily asked, curled beside Olivia on the sofa. The past week had brought tentative bonds between mother and daughter, strengthened by shared trauma and healing. Jack looked out the window at the peaceful countryside, so different from the Manhattan skyline that had defined his life. The company will be restructured under judicial supervision. Most of the assets will likely be liquidated to pay restitution. And Richard? Matthew asked from his position by the door, still instinctively guarding them all. Denied bail, Jack replied. Too many influential people are distancing themselves, offering evidence in exchange for immunity. His own board members are testifying against him. Sarah, who had been quietly observing from an armchair, spoke up. What about you, Jack? What will you do now that everyone knows the truth about your birth? It was the question Jack had been asking himself since that night. His identity, his past, his future, everything had been built on Richard's lies. I don't know yet, he admitted. But for the first time in my life, I get to decide. We all do. As evening fell, the unlikely family sat together, bound not by Richard's manipulations but by their shared determination to reclaim their lives from his shadow. The empire he had built through decades of control and deception had collapsed in a single night. But from its ruins, something more valuable was beginning to emerge: truth, freedom, and the chance for genuine connection. The ruby rings that Emily and Victoria both wore, once symbols of Richard's twisted plans, now represented something different: a family finding their way back to each other against impossible odds. 6 months passed like the changing of seasons, gradual yet transformative. The Reynolds scandal had faded from front-page news but continued to ripple through business and legal circles. Richard remained in custody, awaiting trial, his empire dismantled piece by piece under judicial supervision. On a crisp autumn morning, Jack stood before the fenced property where Sunshine Children's Home once stood. Construction equipment sat idle, the Sunshine Plaza project permanently halted. A for sale sign swayed gently in the breeze, the Reynolds Development logo conspicuously absent. Penny for your thoughts? Matthew asked, joining him at the fence. Jack smiled. I was thinking about purpose, how everything here was built on control and manipulation. I want to create something different. You have the chance now, Matthew replied. The settlement gave you resources, even after the restitution payments. The legal aftermath had been complex. While Jack bore no responsibility for Richard's crimes, he had voluntarily surrendered most of his Reynolds inheritance to establish a victim compensation fund. The court had, however, awarded him control of several untainted assets, enough to start again without the shadow of his father's wealth. I've been speaking with the city council, Jack said. They're open to rezoning this property for community use instead of luxury retail, with the right proposal. Matthew nodded, understanding dawning on his face. A community center? Maybe with a training program for kids aging out of foster care? Exactly. Technical skills, mentoring, support services. Jack turned to face his friend. I could use someone who knows engines to run the automotive program. Matthew laughed. Are you offering me a job, Reynolds? Collins, Jack corrected. I legally changed it last week. Sarah gave me a home when she didn't have to. It seemed right to honor that. They walked back to Jack's car. No longer a luxury sedan but a practical family vehicle. The drive to their new home took them out of the city to a modest farmhouse on 3 acres of land, large enough for their unconventional family, but worlds away from the opulence of Jack's former penthouse. Inside, Emily, now comfortably answering to both Emily and Lily depending on who was addressing her, sat at the kitchen table with Olivia and Sarah, working on a science project. The two mothers had formed an unexpected bond, their shared love for Emily bridging differences in background and experience. Victoria arrived later for dinner, her transformation as dramatic as Jack's. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup, replaced by casual comfort and genuine smiles. She had dissolved her family's hotel business, using her inheritance to establish a foundation supporting families separated by adoption fraud. I have news, Victoria announced over dessert. The Sunshine Memorial Foundation was approved for nonprofit status today. We can start accepting donations for the community center project. Cheers erupted around the table. The foundation, jointly led by Jack, Victoria, Sarah, and Matthew, had become their shared mission, a way to transform the pain of the past into something healing. And, Victoria continued, glancing at Emily, the educational scholarship program for orphan children will launch next month. We're calling it the Collins Reynolds Scholars. Emily beamed with pride. At 10 years old, she had insisted on being involved in the foundation's planning, particularly the programs for children. Her unique perspective had proven invaluable. Later that evening, Jack found Emily sitting on the porch swing, looking up at the stars. Big day tomorrow, he said, joining her. First day at your new school. Emily nodded. Do you think kids will ask about everything, about being on the news and Richard being my father? Jack considered this. Some might, but you don't have to answer anything you don't want to. And remember, family isn't just about blood. It's about who loves you and who you choose to love back. Like us, Emily said simply. We chose each other. Jack smiled, his heart full. 6 months ago, he had been trapped in a life built on lies, engaged to a woman he didn't love, working for a company founded on corruption. Now, surrounded by an improbable family forged through shared trauma and healing, he had found something Richard's wealth could never buy: genuine connection. The foundation's slogan, painted on the barn they were converting into a workshop space, summed it up perfectly: building better futures together, not through manipulation or control, but through truth, choice, and the courage to start again. As Emily leaned against his shoulder, Jack realized that the collapse of the Reynolds empire hadn't been an ending at all. It had been the beginning of something far more valuable than all the buildings Richard had ever constructed. 1 year had passed since the night that changed everything. The sprawling grounds of what was once planned as Sunshine Plaza now bustled with activity, but not the kind Richard Reynolds had envisioned. Where luxury condominiums and high-end retail spaces would have stood, a vibrant community center thrived. Today marked the official opening of the Sunshine Memorial Center, and a modest crowd had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. No celebrities or politicians this time, just community members, former orphanage residents, and the unconventional family that had made it all possible. Jack Collins, formerly Reynolds, stood at the podium, dressed simply in khakis and a button-down shirt. The past year had softened him, erasing the sharp edges of the corporate executive he once was. A year ago, he began, his voice carrying across the attentive crowd. Many of us were strangers, connected only by secrets and pain engineered by one man's obsession with control. Today, we gather not to dwell on that past, but to celebrate what we've built from its ashes. He gestured to the buildings behind him, a modern educational facility, workshops for technical training, counseling offices, and family support services. At the center of the campus stood a small memorial garden dedicated to those whose lives had been disrupted by the Reynolds empire. The Sunshine Memorial Center represents a new kind of legacy, Jack continued, not one built on manipulation and deceit, but on transparency, healing, and genuine connection. Every person who walks through these doors will find support without strings attached, opportunity without exploitation. Emily, now 11 and comfortably answering to both Emily and Lily, sat in the front row between Olivia and Sarah, beaming with pride. Next to them sat Victoria, no longer the polished socialite but a focused advocate whose testimony had been crucial in the ongoing cases against Richard Reynolds and his associates. Matthew stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching over them all with the protective instinct that had become his nature. As director of the technical training program, he had already begun working with a group of teenagers aging out of foster care, teaching them automotive skills and, more importantly, dignity, self-reliance, and trust. I want to thank those who made today possible, Jack said, his eyes moving from face to face. Matthew Collins, whose courage and loyalty never wavered. Sarah Collins, who risked everything to protect a child who wasn't hers by birth but became hers through love. Olivia, who endured decades of silence but found her voice when it mattered most. Victoria, who chose truth over privilege. His voice softened as he looked at Emily. And especially this young lady, who reminded us all what matters when the world seemed upside down. Emily rose and joined Jack at the podium, her confidence remarkable for one so young. Together, they cut the ribbon, officially opening the center. As applause rippled through the crowd, the celebration continued through the afternoon. Community members toured the facilities, children played in the garden, and volunteers served a simple lunch. There were no crystal chandeliers or champagne flutes, just people coming together with authentic joy. As the day drew to a close, Jack found Emily sitting on a bench in the memorial garden, turning her ruby ring thoughtfully. "What's on your mind?" he asked, joining her. Emily looked up. "I've been thinking about this ring. It started everything, you recognizing it that day on the road, but it also represents all the bad things Richard did." Jack nodded, understanding her conflicted feelings. Objects carry the meaning we give them. This ring connected us when Richard tried to keep us apart. That's something good that came from something bad. Emily considered this, then slowly removed the ring. "I think it belongs here, don't you? In the memorial, so people remember the story." Jack felt a surge of pride in her wisdom. "I think that's perfect." Together, they walked to the small display case in the center of the garden, where photos and mementos told the story of Sunshine Children's Home and the lives touched by it. Emily placed the ruby ring among them, its deep red catching the late afternoon light. "It's not just about remembering the bad things," Emily explained. "It's about remembering that good things can come after, like us finding each other." Later that evening, their extended family gathered for dinner at the farmhouse that had become home. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter that would have seemed impossible a year before. They were no longer bound by Richard's manipulation but by choice and love. After dinner, Jack presented Emily with a small box. Inside was a simple silver band, nothing extravagant or valuable like the ruby ring, but meaningful in its simplicity. "This isn't about ownership or control," Jack explained. "It's a new kind of promise, that family is something we build together, not something imposed on us." Emily slipped the ring on her finger, this one properly sized for her. Around the table, Jack, Victoria, Olivia, Sarah, and Matthew each revealed matching bands, symbols of their chosen family. As the stars appeared in the martensite sky, they sat on the porch, sharing stories and dreams for the future. Richard Reynolds remained in custody, awaiting trial, his empire dismantled, his power gone. Yet his name rarely entered their conversations anymore. They had moved beyond being defined by his actions. The Sunshine Memorial Center would stand as a reminder of paths diverted and lives disrupted, but also as proof that new beginnings were always possible. From the ashes of manipulation and control had risen something authentic, a family forged through choice rather than obligation, and a legacy built on healing rather than power. Jack looked around at these people who had become his true family, feeling a contentment that all of Richard's wealth had never provided. Emily caught his eye and smiled, her face reflecting the peace they'd all found. The ruby ring was where it belonged in the past. Their future, symbolized by the simple silver bands they now wore, stretched before them, unwritten and full of possibility.